part of it, and
Yeah.
Mitsubishi's the investor.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Bedford Township Planning Commission regular meeting, September 8, 2021. It is 7:04. Like to stand up and do a pledge of allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call. You want to do a roll call, Mr. Kaverick?
Matt Anger,
I think Matt is excused.
Brad Helm,
Here.
Ron Fritz,
Here.
Patrick Mahoney,
Here.
Rick Steiner,
Aye.
Garvick's here.
Okay, approval of the agenda. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda? Is there anything missing or something we should have added?
Mr. Mahoney,
Yes.
I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda with one addition. I'd like to go down to 7B and call it 7B1 and 7B2. 7B1 is just to take a vote to reopen the discussion on the light industrial, which is actually item B2, but since there was no formal motion at the July 28th meeting because it was just tabled to a future time frame, I want to make a motion that we vote to go ahead and be able to take on item B2. That'll be B1. Just basically say vote that we want to continue discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to have a discussion about that myself. Do we need to add something to the agenda to do that?
That's what Rick's requesting.
That's what I'm adding. So
Is
we're
to
gonna-
add 7B1 to be able to make a motion to make a decision whether the board wants to put it on the agenda for the
Yeah,
next meeting.
okay.
It's on the agenda, but we technically have to have a vote to say, yes, we're going to
Keep it on the
proceed
table
to
or,
discussion.
yeah, or, okay. Yes. Is there support for the motion?
Support.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Okay, it's so added. Okay, any other comments or changes to the agenda? Move on to approval of the minutes of July 28, 2021. Has everybody had a chance to read them? Any questions, changes?
Motion to approve the minutes of July 28, 2021 Township Planning Commission meeting as presented.
Support.
Okay, Mr. Fritz supports. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Okay, time for public comment. Is there anybody here for public comment? The room looks empty except for Bob. Okay, so we'll move on to new business. Discussion on review of the capital improvement plan. Okay, Mr. Steiner, do we have to have direction from the township board to appoint a committee?
There was a committee that was approved back in 2019. There was not a lot that happened with that committee to come to a good consensus for the CIP. Back at that time, Ms. Tinvery, which was on the board, is also, was she liaison? Yeah, she was one of the liaisons
Yes.
to the CIP. Anyway, Ms. Tinvery, she went ahead and helped create the current document that you see in front of you for the CIP. Anything that is done does come with the direction of the township board. So the township would direct the planning department to work with this capital improvement committee for further development of a CIP.
Ms. Rector.
I would like to add too, today, the planning and the finance department met along with the township clerk, and we had a discussion regarding the CIP in the previous committee. After further discussion, and to be cost effective for the township, We thought we would utilize and request to the Planning Commission to utilize the in-house knowledge and documentation we may already have on file. I know when the committee started to dissolve and not meet anymore was a presentation that was brought to the Township Board and discussed for finance to be able to have a company come into the structures and seek determination to be able to spread that cost of future repairs and maintenance that may be required. We're looking to maybe hold off on the committee, seek for, and if any commission members, we're permitted to have 3, if any commission members would be interested in meeting at any of the times that we're going to have meetings and not actually direct a committee, but get with the finance department, the clerk's department, get a better asset list, because the one that's in the packet of the approved CIP is very minimal of the assets that the township has acquired. And so we would like to look to be able to have the finance department, planning department, clerk's department, and possibly a commission member work together, get that asset on a spreadsheet that defines exactly maybe what departments are assets, what structures, and then look to have planning commission give direction for the building department to look at those assets of structures, see what we actually have in-house and on file to guide on what's been repaired, what possibly, like this building, I think it was built in '07, what was the lifespan of the roof? I'm just going to use that as an easy example. What's the lifespan of the roof? Was it a 30-year? Where are we at, and what would the cost be if we had to replace that, maintenance or repairs? We want to make sure we have something that's giving a span of the 6 years of the CIP process. And then maybe once after obtaining that information, getting it downsized to where on a spreadsheet we have the repairs, the maintenance, the cost of the structure, what the possibility is of repairs that may need to be done, and then present that to the Planning Commission to begin to work on prioritizing then where is the structures that need to have maintenance done sooner than later, because that's actually the ideal thing of the concept of having the CIP. In having the CIP, we have a master plan, and we do have the sewer treatment plant, so we are required to have all 3 of those in conjunction together. That way then, if the Planning Commission gives direction for those items to be at least moving forward, I did ask the finance manager, Bob Miller, to come to the meeting, so if you had any questions, maybe where we're at financially with the CIP and what's been included in the budget for the year, Bob can speak on that end, and I think having him involved is very important because he is the one dealing with the monies of the township and the accounts of what's being put in, what's being transferred, what billing's going out for what structures that have been repaired or maintained. So I will have you come up to the podium, and if anybody has any questions or if you have any questions for me, but that is where we would like to see the commission take a stance at this point, maybe give direction for the planning department and the finance department to work in conjunction with the clerk, get a better asset list, define those. I know Bob's been working, Mr. Miller's been working on that already, trying to get that in a better format so we can bring it and present it. But we thought we would start with that, and then if we think in the future we need to have a committee and work in that direction, then go back to the township board and see if that's something of their desire as well.
Mm-hmm. That all sounds good.
So if anybody has any questions for Mr. Miller, please feel free to ask regarding the committee or regarding the CIP, I'm sorry.
Well, I can start by just saying, in this fiscal year, we have $180,000 budgeted for capital improvements. That includes $100,000 in buildings, $50,000 in equipment, $5,000 for a plotter, and $17,000 for information technology. Is where we're sitting right now. If we do not spend those funds, they roll over to next year.
Is it usually a use it or lose it proposition for departments, or is it scrutinized by the board?
We made a change last fiscal year where we set up its own separate fund. So now when we put money in, it's called the Township Improvement Revolving Fund, which is Fund 446. When we fund that, it stays there. It's no longer use it or lose it. If you don't use it, it rolls to next year.
That doesn't go back to the general fund.
Right, it does not go back to the general fund.
And the ideal purpose of it is that when it comes to the Planning Commission for determination after items are prioritized, being it's a working document, some things can be put on the asset list, some things could be taken off the asset list, something may change. The Planning Commission may determine one roof or one structure needs something, but then we have something happen to a building, and then that has to be prioritized for funding before it can be fluctuated of the priority of what's required for each building.
Mr. Steiner.
And another thing too, I'm sure everybody's aware and have heard about the ARPA funds that the township is eligible for, 3.3 million. The application was made for the funds, and Mr. Miller, you and I talked a week or two ago. Has the first amount of funds, have you got any more information on when we might get those?
They're thinking within 3 weeks, but our application still has not been approved. But that doesn't mean anything because right now more than half the townships across the state have not been approved yet. They're working to get them approved.
Probably shortage of manpower to get it all done. But
1,600 applications.
well, what that is, well, the federal government, basically, some people call it COVID relief funds.
Okay.
It's the American Rescue Plan Fund, and basically it's reinvestment, and the township board actually had to vote to approve completing the application to acquire the funds. We have up until 2026 to spend the funds, but everything has to be planned by the end of 2024, right, Mr. Miller?
Correct. Contracts have to be signed by the end of 2024.
So we have to have everything ready by 24, but the work can go out into 25, 26. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, you know, everybody might have an idea, oh, 100,000 here, 100,000 there, and next thing you know, 3.3 million goes away. But there could be something within the capital improvement, and Mr. Miller's got a good handle on it. Nicole from the Treasury Department, she's been working real close with Mr. Miller. I know that he's been working with Jody and some of the other township employees. So there could be certain things in here that they're better than a wish list. They're things that we really, really need to tackle. And Mr. Miller being really close to this project, he might have an idea right off the top of his head saying, well, that would qualify or it wouldn't. Some things he might say, well, I think it'll qualify. There's always a but, and the stipulations have got to be to a T. In fact, we talked about hiring a part-time person to help him administer just this. Mm-hmm. And the good news out of that, that person can also be paid from these funds. So there's no cost to the township whatsoever. So it was really a win-win. We had a 6-1 vote on the township board. And the thing is, you know, none of us want to pay more in taxes. But you know what? If we don't accept that $3.3 million, somebody else is going to get that money. And Bedford Township's still going to pay the same amount of taxes that the whole nation's going to pay, you know, based on this big amount of money. So we might as well get something in return for, I mean, because it's going to hit everybody's, you know, bottom line in their pocketbook.
How does that happen? How do individual taxes go up because of this?
Well, I'm just saying, individual person, everybody's tax base, you know, it always gets adjusted. Mm-hmm. And if, let's just say that we've got $3 million worth of things to do in the township, well, either we can't do it because we don't have the funds, but we got the needs, or B, what if we have to do something we don't really have the funds for, so we have to place a millage out there to make it happen. So really, it hits our bottom line in our pocketbook as a taxpayer to vote for a millage if you want something. So if these ARPA funds might cover that or a percentage of that, well, now guess what? We don't have to have a millage. we've got some funding to take care of it. So again, there's a lot of stipulations in there, and believe me, I'm not even well spoken on the whole thing, except for what I've learned talking to Mr. Miller. So
I was just thinking in terms of, is there a commitment on the township's part to, say, buy a new building? Do we have to pay for half of it and they would cover the other half? Or is it how we choose to use the
well,
funds?
I'm going to speak. I'll let Mr. Miller answer. We just can't go out and buy a new building. We can't go out and buy a new fire truck, things like that.
And I'm just going
I use
to
it as
say
an
that
example.
fund is different than the CIP.
Right.
Keep in mind that what Mr. Steiner is stating is that there may be possibly funds that could be used for structures or that determining on the qualifications for the ARPA funds. But other than that, that's different than the funds from the general fund into the CIP, the 444.
Yeah, one of the key words in there is infrastructure in that ARPA. So, I mean, just like one of them was brought up by a couple of people, what about, some of them said, what about a new cable company? Well, you're going to be hard pressed to find a company that's going to come in and try to run all brand new cable, especially when, who knows, in 4 or 5 years, we might not even be using cable to begin with. So nobody's going to invest that kind of money to watch it go away. So again, it's, again, I'm gonna be quiet here. Mr. Miller's got really the meat and potatoes of that information, but I figured I'd help him out.
Yes. So Jody is correct. It is two separate, but they can be intertwined. One good example is the ARPA funds are for items that are directly related to COVID-19. So a good example would be like this room. They could redo the ventilation because we're sitting so close to each other. Would be one example how infrastructure could tie into a COVID-related issue.
For example, we approved purchase of some of the ultraviolet, I think it
Yes.
was, for to kill some of the COVID virus in some of the ductwork back when we were really at the height of the COVID situation.
But it would not qualify just to build a new building. But there's always an exception to every rule and an exception to the exception. There is a line item called revenue loss. So if we can show a revenue loss, that gives us more options to go that route too.
But they'll scrutinize that.
They'll scrutinize it, and we have to, really understand the whole process.
Does that mean if tax revenues aren't what we expected?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, instead of just tax revenue or tax, it could be any revenue, and then you factor in your expenses. If we can show a loss, they have a huge formula to do that.
How do you handle projection? How far out do you go? 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, I just started. We have, an example would be the fire department. We can work off theirs. They have a long-run budget, but that is where this capital improvement plan will be a huge benefit. Once we get this created, once we know a roof on a building will need to be done in 5 years, we know a parking lot will need to be redone in 10, then we can start really analyzing our long-term needs.
I was thinking on the revenue side.
Oh, revenue side, that's pretty consistent. You've got the millages, which won't change a whole lot, and you have the state shared revenue, which will be consistent.
Well, they'll change if the tax base of the homes drop, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
But there won't be large swings. Unless the COVID issue comes along and state revenue stops. That's what the board went through last year. They had to make some big cuts, but the cuts never came, luckily.
Mr. Fritz?
I have a question for Jody, if everybody's done with.
Yes? What was that question?
I didn't see anything in here about a sample wording for that. I know we have to keep in with the Michigan Planning Enable Act and all that, so how do you want this motion worded?
We actually just are looking for a motion for direction to have the finance and planning department to continue to work with the clerk on the asset and priority of the township, and to direct the building department to gather any documentation they may have on the structures listed on that asset list. We're actually going to, there's a process. We're going to reach out to of course, the maintenance, because they work in those maintenance buildings. But we think this is a good starting point to get the major assets, which would be the structures of the township, moving forward, and just to have direction, because it does have to come from the Planning Commission to allow us to continue to work on the project and get the information easily ready for you to be able to look at and go through a spreadsheet, instead of you coming and trying to have all of the assets and then working with the building department or the maintenance. So we're trying to get that condensed into a spreadsheet to then provide it to you, where we can go line item and then discuss it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Mr. Miller, and we are willing and hopeful that you will stay engaged in it, because it is something that does fall back on the Planning Commission to determine the priority list of the structures, what the long term is for those repairs, and you are required to give direction to the Township Board and advise them of what is priority. And then with Mr. Steiner's assistance as being the trustee representation.
Who would you be taking your direction from?
I'm getting direction from you to move forward with that.
No, I'm saying, if it's all set, you would be getting your direction from the township?
Bob
Or
and I
from-
would work together with Trudy, as she oversees the plant, Mrs. Hirschberger, as she oversees the planning department. We would work in conjunction with her, because she has actually been working with the
CIP?
with the assessment or the assets the township has already. Her and Mr. Miller have had a work together, and they do have a downsized spreadsheet of those items. We're just going to try to get them in what's in the planning department, what's in the building department, because those all have to be broke down in each individual department of the township, as well as assets.
I guess what I'm looking for is, who would be directing you on what to do and when to do it? Just so that's written down, so this department don't come to you and tell you this, and we come and tell you this.
That's actually part of the plan. In the actual plan, you will see that there is a process
Okay.
that states that I believe the supervisor is to meet with each head of the department, and then he meets with the planning commission and gives you direction of what's in those departments for assets. We're just trying to get it so it's at that point where it's easier for all of us to be able to discuss it and move forward with the requirements that are going to be needed for each structure or each department.
I would like to make a motion, but I can't write it that fast as you talk.
She's talking slow today. What are you talking about?
So I'd like to make a motion, and I don't know,
I guess that maybe Mr. Mahoney could ask if there's any more discussion, or if anybody has any questions for Mr. Miller or our.
Does anybody have any other questions for Mr. Miller or Jody?
Do you have any more comments?
Yeah, just a comment there. So here again, being that the planning department itself falls under the township clerk, so you were saying really who's in charge? I mean, so planning all rolls up through the clerk's department, but the CIP document does reference the township supervisor. So it's a combination of them working together. The department heads really, so I mean, because we got finance involved, so you've got your treasurer. We have planning involved, so you've got your township clerk. CIP is under the township clerk. Bob, even though he's separate, he's finances, which is separate from the treasury department, so you got Bob involved there. So you've got your department heads all have to work on this together. If there's anything that we need to spend money up front for anything, then it goes to the township board to say yes or no to spend it, or they may come back to this board and say, does this make sense? We, the committee or whoever, say we figure it's going to cost us $5,000 to do X. And this board here could sit here and they could tweak it, say yes, no, good idea, bad idea, and then this board could recommend to the township board, hey, I think that we should spend this $5,000 because, and here's what it's for, here's basically our return on investment, so on and so on.
I was just looking for, you're talking about a spreadsheet, but then also, who are you responsible to? Only so you don't get 3 or 4 different
Absolutely.
departments coming down on you.
And
you know?
Rick is correct, having the department heads, that's why we're requesting to include the building department as well as
Okay.
moving forward with seeing what they have on file. So we're all working together because we will rely on our building official for some of those structural comments of what will need repaired. So I think it's very important to include that in the motion as well.
Yeah, so you'll see a spreadsheet, and Bob, I thought I was a pretty good master at spreadsheets. Bob's got me beat. So it's going to be multiple levels. So you're going to have your high level here. Here's this department, and all these subcategories fall into that department. That's where the supervisor, the clerk, and the treasurer need to go down their list, what their responsibilities are, and then talk to the individual, like the building department, the planning department, and go through their respective categories and say, okay, you and we are responsible for this, this, and this. Township supervisor, he and they are responsible for this, this, and this. So each one of those entities are going to have to create that list to roll up into the master document. And the one thing, like I said, Bob's a master of this. When we start to put numbers to this, Bob's spreadsheets, if you change a number, it rolls, and the bottom number is there. We did that through our budget process this year, and as many years I've been involved, it's the best budget process we've ever had, because Bob had a live document as we were going through the budget, and that's why this is going to be good. I will say we want to expand on this a little bit. I think there's some columns missing out to the right, and we can talk about that more once we get into those phases.
Yes.
This part of your packet, if you think of any columns out here to the right that we need to add, make those recommendations, and you know, you can make them to Jody, you can make them to Bob, me, anybody, and talk about, I mean, we got your remolded according to this, remodeled, rating, work done. Well, we need to look at when is the next maintenance, when should the next maintenance be done? If it's 5 years, what is a projected cost? We don't know that for sure, but we've got to come up with something projected. All right, what if it's you figure it's a roof? Okay, that roof's supposed to be good for 20 years. We've got to throw some kind of number at it. And between building department and you could probably get a hold of, they could get a hold of some roofing companies or even the company that does our roof work, and they could give you a projected price for 20 years out.
And it won't cost money for them to do it. And you can reach out to other townships and ask them, hey, did you build a
Right.
fire department recently or a new fire building?
And I
Find out
think
what that
that we
costs.
can rely on some of those agencies that we utilize, such as Rawlings for our heating and cooling. We should be able to reach out to those agencies that already do work and see when was the last maintenance done, what was repaired. So we do have an idea. I think that's why we thought if we stayed in-house first instead of to try to keep the cost down, to see what information we can gather working directly on it ourselves first.
And the other thing, too, if any of these department heads have something that they have in the back of their mind that they think they need, it's a good place to put it. And go ahead.
Mr. Garbrick has his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if we throw a number at this, and let's say we just throw a number out, it's $300,000 to do a roof, and it's expected to last 10 years, and we do all these numbers, what happens when they come in and the lowest bid we get at that point is $400,000? Where does that extra $100,000 come from? You know, we're guessing at this, and the longer out that it lasts, longer, oil prices and everything's going to go up with stuff. So if what do we do when we fall short? Is that a bond? Is that
Well, that's a
Peter to
very
pay
good
Paul?
question, because that is one of the tasks that we need to create in the plan is funding. How are you going to fund these projects? It is a 6-year plan. We would put monies aside every year, and we would go back every year and say, okay, we know we're going to do this roof X years out. You do the same thing, get another estimate or just best guess. As it gets closer, if we do fall short in your case, we have the options of pulling it from general fund, a loan, bond, depending on what it is. That's where the CIP plan will come into play and say, these are our financing options.
And it's updated every year.
And it's updated every year.
Yeah, so if we see that we know roofs are gonna be higher, we can add to it. I guess, maybe this is a question for the attorney there, is Marty, is, other township do this like this? I think it's really good to have monies, and then, does it work pretty well when we start saying, hey, instead of one big pot, we're taking and putting in 6 different areas, and
I'm sorry, I don't have any information of what other townships are doing.
okay. I just think it's, you know, if you got $1 million in a pot, if you can put 100,000 in 10 different ones, and then I just think it's good to have.
This is one fund to disperse over all the assets
Correct.
of the township. So the job of the planning commission then is, once we get that determination of the assets, the projection of possibly what could be required to be repaired or maintained, and the term length that may be, that's where you come up with the money. So if something costs 100,000 and we are looking at it for 10 years, then you should be putting your 10,000 in every year for that one specific project.
Okay.
So that's where the funding comes in of where the projects stand. So then if a roof was supposed to be repaired and we look at 7 years and we have another structure that needs something, then you prioritize that before it, and then you push that out the extra year. But that is where then your input comes into play of what is priority and where the funding then is directed to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one additional comment. I think Jody has 2 samples, or I know Jody has one for sure, and I have a different one, of townships and their plans. So if you'd like to see sample plans, we have access to at least 2.
Thank you.
I can actually email one of those out to you if you'd like.
Okay.
So if you go back to the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, first line right there will tell you that it's supposed to be an annual process within the master plan. I can tell you right now that a lot of townships don't do it. And as many years as I've been involved, this is probably going to be I think this is going to turn into the strongest we've had yet, because I think we've got a lot of interest and a lot of involvement between this commission, township board, and our department head. They feel strongly about it. You can tell. I'm sort of looking at this CIP as a twofold thing. Oh, and I forgot. You've also got the CIP, but you've got the CIB. And if you read through here, it also states that if we know we've got to do a roof next year, we've got to get it in the budget this year for next year's proposed budget. That way the township board can say, well, you know what? We have to have that roof. And if it's going to cost $100,000, the township board then has to take on that responsibility that, you know what, we only put in $300,000 over here because that was what was approved in the CIP. Township boards have got to figure out how they're going to get that other $100,000. So, I mean, it's not, this board is not 100% responsible for that. That's the township to deal with. But I look at this, and I don't know, maybe somebody picked up on this by my comments. By changing the format of this spreadsheet and adding these columns, I'm asking you guys to come up with ideas. I'm sure we all can probably add some different ones. We can turn this into the best preventive maintenance program we've ever had, because honestly, we don't have a good document working tool for tracking all the maintenance all in one location. I mean, maybe different departments have different things, you know, and I'm not in the township building every day and know every in and out, but to put it in one place so it's accessible, and, you know, right now the finance manager, he's going to have his fingertips on it, and you go to him, you're going to say, hey, what about this, this, and this? He'll pull it up on his computer within seconds, and he can spit it out, print it, do whatever with it. So, again, I just think I'm really glad to see we're doing this, and this is going to be a good tool going forward from a CIP, budgeting, planning, and, you know, we've got some old stuff here in the township. A lot of it's been preserved well, and we want to try to make sure that we don't have to replace it. You know, do the repairs when we can, and instead of replacing.
Ms. Rector?
Yes, I also just wanted to touch on Mr. Garvick's comment about other communities. if you read the Michigan Planning Enabling Act number 2, does state that any township may prepare and adopt a capital improvement program. However, subsection 1 is only mandatory for a township if the township alone or jointly with one or more of other local units of government owns or operates a water supply or a sewage disposal system. So in conjunction with our master plan and the water treatment plant and the sewage, we do need to have a CIP program in conjunction with that. So that is why we should have moved forward with this and have these items addressed at this time.
I stopped up at Tuscola Township, and they don't have one. They looked at me, what are you talking about? They have well water and septic systems in their township. Like, really? So, yeah, this is a good thing. It's a good tool, like you said, Rick.
Yeah, and and our fire chief, he's got tons on his plate, but, he might even have a couple of good things to say because, he's developed a long-term future use budgetary plan. He might give us some good pointers to go through. We could probably ask the Drain Commission for drain and sewer. I mean, they've got a plan, so many years out from our sewer system and our water system as well. Not to ask them to do a bunch of work for us, but again, those are resources that we could probably get some answers and help for no charge. And that's why we're going to roll this down into the right departments to do that.
Any other comments, questions? Is there a motion on the floor to pursue a CIP committee?
Is that what we're going to call the committee?
No, I would like just it to state direction to allow the planning department and finance department. Did you want me to say
Work
it?
together, yeah.
To work together in
I'll help
conjunction
you.
with the clerk
Okay.
in presenting the assets and priority of the township and direct the building department to move forward to obtain any documents that they may have on the asset structures that we will supply them once we have it downsized.
Do you make that motion, Mr. Fritz?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in, why don't we take a roll call?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Steiner,
Aye.
Mr. Helm,
Aye.
Mr. Garvick, aye, Mr. Fritz.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda, discussion regarding proposed ordinance language amendment to allow additional on-site sales in an I-2 light industrial zoning district for a composting facility.
We have item B1 first, so I'm going to make a motion on B1 that we vote to continue with discussion on the proposed ordinance language for amendment to allow additional on-site sales in I-2. So my motion is to vote on continuing that discussion.
Support.
Call the roll?
Mr. Helm,
Yes.
Garvick, yes. Mr. Mahoney,
Yes.
Mr. Fritz,
Yes.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Do you want to start conversation, Mr. Steiner?
So, again, at the July 28th meeting, there was a lot of uncertainties of expansion and changing the language of our ordinance that currently allows composting in light industrial zoning district. And the discussion is around whether we want to update the language to allow commercial type sales within the industrial I-2 light industrial zoning. It currently does not allow for sales of anything off-site such as a commercial sale. The only thing that is currently allowed in the current ordinance is what is produced specifically on that site. So our discussion basically comes down to, do we want to make an amendment the things that are being looked at or discussed are sale of rocks, millings, screenings, other landscape type materials, et cetera. We also had some discussion is what is landscape materials? That could be trees, that could be plantings of any kind, rocks, which is not currently allowed in I-2, various stones. What's really, again, is allowed today is compost type material, mulch, things like that.
I'm sorry, Ms. Rector.
That's all right. I just wanted to add that after going back over the minutes and rereading them, I believe Mr. Fritz's concern with the word screening was the byproduct of the composting. So we did change that language and add location of on-site commercial sales of rocks, millings, screenings from a composting byproduct, and other materials produced on site from the composting operation. Because I believe that was a little misconfusion of the screenings, not so much trees in that, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your intent was the byproduct of the screenings of the product on site. And as requested by the Planning Commission at the last meeting, we did include other locations that we had been able to obtain of different types of product that was being sold on their sites that had composting facilities.
And they didn't include rocks and millings and other things.
From what
like
we
that.
found, most of it was mulch, topsoils. Some of them had grass seed, different types of fertilizers. One had river rocks, limestone, and we did include those in the packets. But majority of them had mulch, different types of mulch, different types of topsoil, garden blends.
And what was their zoning?
It didn't actually tell us the zonings of the property. It just told us that we just looked at what was requested. We didn't research actually what communities they were in or what their zoning was, just what their for sale of items was.
So those items could be
On a
sold
commercial-
on a
If they were on
commercial
a commercial
site
site.
or ag, probably. So, yeah, so we're not 100% on those things in that what zoning they were.
Correct. I think the comment was other items that were sold. And if you, we did supply on page, I think it's the third page, it's listed as Ohio Compost. They show premium mulch, ultra black, red mulch, wood chips, topsoil, sand, compost, topsoil blend, fill dirt, and then they give their cost for each one. So that is what they had sold as on-site. And we did supply 3 or 4 other items as locations as well.
I guess one concern I have is if we change the verbiage in our ordinances to suit one person's request, or will we held to that same standard when somebody else wants to do it in a different zone property, like the subject that came up last night at the township meeting about installing solar panels in an agricultural environment. Are we going to hold ourselves to this arbitrary standard of picking and choosing what we can and can't do for somebody who's asking, and will that cause problems down the road? Any thoughts on that? Concerns? And I'd like to preface too, I love the Mulch King. I use them, and I recommend him to anybody, but like I was saying, I know we've had some issues with the Mulch King, and I presume he's getting things squared away, but, and I encourage anybody to use them. It's a really good place to go for mulch and topsoil and to dump your leaves. I'm not in favor of changing language to suit what somebody decides to sell one day. Mr. Gaverick?
I know there's been some issues in the past in that, and I take my hat off to them because there's not too many businesses that
the amount of stuff they take in for free from this township is crazy, and they're trying to make a living at it, so everybody's bringing their stuff in there.
Will they charge?
What's that?
They charge.
Yeah, but it's a joke. I mean,
It's a minimal amount.
Yeah, it might as well not charge, he's not making money on it, so, and I don't care either way, but I think they're a great asset to the township and what they do, and they're nice guys, and I don't know where everybody took their stuff before them, but I buy a lot of stuff over there, and I see these vehicles coming in, and I'm just like, wow. I'd hate to have a business where you just got paid that little bit and try to stay afloat, so. But I think they're good.
A lot of the stuff was burnt within the township, legally.
Yeah, okay. But I like them, and I think they did a great job, and it's a nice product for the township here, but that's all I got to say on it.
Mr. Steiner.
So I agree with Mr. Garrick about a place to take our yard waste material, things like that for recycle, mulch, compost, etc. An ordinance was written to allow this type of business. Even after the ordinance was written, there were numerous amendments that were made to the ordinance. And to Mr. Mahoney's point, there was something on the township board last night, is so do we, every time that a business wants to come in and change the overall aspect of what a zoning ordinance says can be done, changing a zoning is one thing, but to consistently change the text of ordinances, I think that we're going to stray down an ugly path. This business was, if they did their due diligence and they had a plan that it was supposed to be a compost facility, and that's what we're looking at, a composting facility should be a composting facility. Again, if we change the text language to allow various other types of sales on the property, then what comes next? So we, have maybe additional sites that might be industrial that want to do something similar, have various sales, and then they come in and say, well, we've got another item that we want to sell on this property. Well, I want you to amend the language again because I've got something a little different and I think it fits for the community, so why can't I have it? So we got to be real careful at setting precedent. Honestly, I'm not in favor of changing the language to add commercial sales on light industrial property, because that also leaves it open to any other light industrial properties. Maybe they're not compost, maybe they're something else, but light industrial says, hey, I could bring things in here and I can sell commercial on my property too. So then you get into that scenario, and again, it may not fit on somebody's light industrial property, but they're going to say, well, you allowed it in the ordinance, so I can do it on my property too.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Fritz, go ahead.
If it was zoned commercial, because it is a commercial compost facility, if it was zoned commercial, would that make a difference to selling the other products that they want to sell?
Ms. Rector?
If it was zoned commercial, the composting facility would not be permitted.
Okay.
So one negates the other.
Pick one or the other.
And you've also got residential properties that are nearby some of these areas, so you have to be careful what's right next to it, whether you've got any step-down zoning as well. And again, that was part of what was written within that ordinance. Again, that it does maybe look a little bit misleading that it's a commercial compost facility. And that was what was written to allow for the sale on I-2 property.
Is everything that they're asking to sell, is that listed here? Or they would pick and choose what they wanted to sell?
Keep in mind,
Yep.
this would be for all composting facilities. So we're not specifically requesting items for sale for one specific location. It would be, if you are not specific, that means they could sell any items they brought in on site,
Anything,
if you allowed for commercial sales.
yeah. So this is to approve for commercial sales in the light industrial zoning district. And it doesn't qualify anything. It's just anything can be sold out of that address.
You open up a door, I think.
Correct.
By the language.
That's what I read, but I just wanted to make sure I was reading it right.
And it's not any specific address, it's any address with this
Correct.
particular
No.
zoning.
Correct.
And if we don't do anything, it just stays like it is?
Well, we would have to send information back to the township board because we were directed from the township board to take a look at the ordinance language and make a determination if there was the desire to amend the language.
Okay.
Otherwise, it would be, if the desire is to amend the language, we would have to schedule the public hearing for the planning commission. You would make a recommendation, and then it would go to the township board.
Okay, thank you.
The alternative might read as a proposal, I'd move to advise the Township Board that the Planning Commission has determined that it is not in the best interest of Bedford Township to propose a text amendment to the I-2 Light Industrial Zoning District that would allow retail commercial sales of products produced off-site at a composting facility. So I guess basically it seems like the question is, do you open the door to allow anything? Even if you specified things, I still think that door is left wide open, and then you may run into problems down the road about what was intended and what wasn't. And the opposite argument would be to just leave the wording as it is and stick to the zoning definition as it stands. So I guess we have to keep our personal feelings out of what we like and dislike about this particular company. So I love them to death. I wish them all the success in the world, but you know, this is more than just this one piece of property in person applying for a change. This is for somebody who's going to come in here a week from now, 2 months from now, a year from now, and want something changed. And the question is, are we going to be in the habit of doing that on a regular basis?
He could buy another piece of property
He could.
that was zoned commercial. And then-
Well, no, because you can't compost on it.
No.
No,
He can
and
buy
sell
a
it.
separate
Oh, to
piece
sell
of paper-
commercial, right.
A piece of property, it could be right next door to him, and then sell the stuff out of that one, and still comply with the rule.
If he was zoned correctly.
Correct, that's what I'm saying, correct.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because there's nothing, nothing stopping someone from investing in property to sell commercial on a commercial property, so.
Right.
Ms. Rector.
Please keep in mind, even if the determination is to not change the language, he's still permitted to sell what is produced on site with the language as it exists. So he'd still be able to sell his wood chips, mulch,
Soils.
screenings of the byproduct, whatever is produced on site. That will not change then if your determination is to not change the language.
Any more discussion? Does somebody want to make a motion, one way or the other?
What was that you just read?
Okay, well, I'll make a motion. I move to advise the Township Board that the Planning Commission has determined that it is not in the best interest of Bedford Township to propose a text amendment to the I-2 Light Industrial Zoning District ordinance that would allow retail commercial sales of products produced off-site at a composting facility.
I'll second.
Okay, do you want to take the roll?
You seconded it, Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Mr. Fritz? Mr. Helm?
Yeah,
Yes.
An aye?
Aye.
no. Yes, I was going to say, I was going to ask, I'm going to say yes.
If you're
For that
agreeing
motion.
with the motion,
Right.
it's a yes. If you are not, it's a nay.
Mr. Fritz, yes. Mr. Helm?
Yes.
Mr. Garvix, yes. Mr. Mahoney?
Aye.
And Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
I just had to think about it for a minute. That was it.
Okay, item 8, public comment. Nobody's here. Nobody's calling in. We'll move on to information. Anybody have any information?
We will be having a meeting on September 22nd. If you have any input regarding permitting chickens in a residential, please forward that information on. I will have Officer Cecil attending the meeting on that night as well,
Who will
as
be? Oh, Cecil.
requested
Oh,
from
good,
the
good.
commission. That is all I have. Everyone have a good evening.
Okay, any comments from Mr. Elm?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Rivera?
I'm good.
I'm good. Mr. Fritz?
I'm good.
Mr. Steiner?
I know this is planning and not township board, but again, everybody keep the memory of what happened 20 years ago on 9/11 and the people that perished, also for the 14 service members that recently perished in Afghanistan trying to protect this country, for us to be able to sit here and have these kind of debates. So please keep everyone in your thoughts and prayers.
Indeed. Anybody from staff?
I have nothing.
Okay, with that, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thank you.